Happy New Year, Floridians! It is January, so I'm going to talk about what you can plant in your Florida vegetable gardens in January. And also I'm going to share a couple of the resources that I use to figure out what to plant when. So the first resource that I use is where I got this chart from. It's the University of Florida's IFAS Extension Office. They have a great website with very detailed, extensive information on Florida vegetable gardening, and I will put a link to that in my description below the video. So they have these monthly charts on there. They have one for every month. This one's January, and they break down what you can plant in Florida in the southern, central, and northern region because it is slightly different. And they also break it down by which plants can easily be transplanted and which ones are better to directly seed into the ground. So I will get back to that in a minute, but I also want to show you another resource I use, which is this book by Tom McCubbin. He's been a gardener in Florida for many years, and he has this great book, The Edible Landscape, which was recommended on my Facebook group. And I went ahead and got it because it has a month-by-month guide in the back of it. I will put a link to this book as well. You can buy it on Amazon, and he actually has quite a few other Florida gardening books, and I think a lot of them have the month-by-month vegetable gardening guides in the books. And I think as long as it has the month-by-month planting guide, that's all that matters. I mean, you don't necessarily have to get this particular book if one of the other books looks good to you. But I'll go over a list that I pulled from online as well. These are a list of warm season crops: beans, cantaloupes, sweet corn, cucumbers, eggplant, okra, southern peas, peppers, sweet potatoes, pumpkin, summer squash and winter squash, tomatoes, and watermelon. Those are all warm season crops. So you would not want to be planting any of these crops outdoors right now unless you have a greenhouse and you're going to be able to protect them from possible freezes. Or if you're able to bring them indoors during a freeze, then that would be okay as well, but I personally hate doing that. So I prefer to either start those indoors or to keep them in a greenhouse where they're protected. I won't grow those warm season crops outdoors right now in the winter time. But then here are the cool season crops, and these can easily be seeded outside, or you can start your seeds inside and transplant outdoors at this time of year as well. Broccoli, cabbage, carrots, cauliflower, celery, Chinese cabbage, collards, endive, kale, kohlrabi, lettuce, mustard, onions, peas, English peas, not southern peas, potatoes, radish, spinach, strawberry, and turnips. So all of these will do great right now at this time of year, and you really don't have to worry about whether you're using transplants or if you're just wanting to directly sow the seeds out into the garden. Most of these cool season crops will do just fine, and most of them can even withstand the light freezes that we get here in Florida, like kale and collards and all the plants in that family. They usually don't even need to be covered if it freezes. Strawberries you do need to cover if it freezes. They will freeze, but they still like the cold. Lettuce also really likes the cold. And lettuce can freeze, but I think it requires a really deep, hard freeze for them to really get frozen. So you don't have to worry too much about the cool season crops in January. So I'm going to go ahead and read what Tom McCubbin recommends for January. He says, plant your cool season vegetables, including beets, broccoli, cabbage, carrots, cauliflower, celery, collards, lettuce, mustards, peas, potatoes, radishes, and turnips. You can also plant herbs such as anise, cardamom, catnip, chives, comfrey, coriander, fennel, horehound, mint, parsley, rosemary, sage, and thyme. And then he says in the middle of January to sow your cucumber, eggplant, pepper, squash, and tomato seeds indoors to have your transplants ready by March. I actually just usually do my tomato and pepper seeds indoors and transplant them out in late February or early March. Our last frost date in my region is, I think, February 11th. So pretty much by the middle of the month, it's safe to transplant warm season crops outdoors. Cucumbers and squash, I don't usually start indoors. You can, but I usually just directly seed those in late February after the frost dates have passed, because they don't like their roots to be disturbed. And I've had times where I grew them from seed to transplant, but I didn't have anything ready to transplant them into in time, and they got pretty big, and they didn't do very well as transplants because they had been growing in pots for too long. So I would say if you're gonna start your squash or cucumbers indoors and transplant them later, just be sure you're ready to transplant them within 4 to 6 weeks from when you started the seeds. Otherwise they can get too big and they don't transplant very well. So Tom McCubbin also gives other tips in here. For one thing, he says that our spring in Florida begins in February, so be ready to place your orders early. He also mentions that we don't get very many rain showers in the winter, so you need to be prepared to water your plants once or twice a week since it's the dry season. I won't read all of these. It's a good book though, so I would recommend it. But now I'm going to mention back to this chart here, what the University of Florida recommends for planting in my region, which is the Central Florida region. So, and I'll go by the way they have it broken down. So they say you can easily transplant in Central Florida in January arugula, beets, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, Chinese cabbage, collards, eggplant, endive, kale, kohlrabi, lettuce, pepper, Swiss chard, and tomatoes. And then they say if you are careful, you can transplant carrots, celery, mustard, potatoes, and spinach. I prefer just to directly sow my carrots and spinach into the garden. I don't transplant those myself, but you could. I've never grown celery or potatoes. Mustard, I believe, grows really easily directly planted in the ground as well. So they're not saying, and I think this chart is a little bit confusing. That's why I'm talking about this, because just because they're saying it survives transplanting, that doesn't mean you have to transplant it. It just means that you can. I was never sure what that meant, but I've since learned and realized that most of these things can be direct seeded or transplanted. So they're just saying, if you want to buy transplants at the store, or if you want to start your seeds indoors and transplant them later, that's fine for the ones that survive transplanting. But then they mention that you should use seeds and just directly sow your seeds into the garden and not use transplants for certain ones, such as cantaloupes, corn, cucumbers, onion, peas, radish, squash, turnip, and watermelon. And that's what I was also talking about, like why I don't transplant my cucumbers and squash, because I find it's better to use seeds. You can do transplants, but they probably ought to have squash and cucumbers in the survives careful transplanting section, but I guess they're just trying to make it as easy for the most people as they can. So there's slight discrepancies between what Tom McCubbin recommends and what the University of Florida recommends. And, you can try both ways and just, see through trial and error and experimentation what works best for you. That's what I've done. And, these aren't hard and fast rules. They're more of just guidelines. You also have to pay attention to the weather, because if it's a warm January, then you might be able to get away with planting your tomatoes and peppers outside. But if you're having really cold weather and you're having freezes a lot, I would not plant my peppers and tomatoes outside in January. And that's another thing I just want to mention with this chart. I don't know why they have peppers and tomatoes on this chart for January. They don't have it on the chart for the north region of Florida. The south region, I'm sure it's probably fine to put your tomatoes and peppers and sweet potatoes out in January. I don't think it freezes down there in the southern part, or their freezes are very rare. But here in central Florida, we definitely still get freezes. So, and your peppers and tomatoes and squash and cucumbers will definitely freeze. So, I'm not sure if they mean that they may mean late in the month. Like if we're having a warm January and it's late in the month and it hasn't been freezing and it's been a mild winter, then you're probably safe to put your transplants outside in late January. But you just have to kind of know the weather and the crops, because I feel like saying that you can put tomato and pepper transplants outside in January is kind of flirting with disaster, because if we do have a cold year and it freezes, you could lose your crops unless you're able to bring them inside. So, and maybe they mean in a greenhouse, or be prepared to cover them or bring them indoors during a freeze. But they don't say that. So that part's a little confusing. That's why I mentioned it. But all of the cool season crops, like I said before, the arugula, beets, broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, collards, kale, lettuce, spinach, all of those are cool season crops and they're fine outside. So I definitely agree with everything they say that you can plant, but I just would start my warm season crops indoors and not transplant them until it's past your frost date, which you can look up online, because it's different depending on which region you're in. So I guess that's pretty much everything. I'll put links to this website where I found this chart, and I'll put a link to this book on Amazon in my description, and a couple of other links where you can find your last frost date and any other resources I think would be helpful for figuring out cool season, warm season crops and weather information for your region. So hopefully that is helpful, and I hope you have a happy day. Bye.